My. Well, I can honestly say that over all the people that they got coming to this thing here today, I am the least qualified. For one thing, I've never been to a hotel like what you got here in this city. We got into the elevator and the man said, "You got to use your key to get up to the room. It's on the 14th floor." I said, "The 14th floor?" We got in that elevator. I used my little magic wand key. I got up to that room. I walked in. I had to try out the bed by jumping on it. It's a lifelong obsession I have. When I see something that looks pretty soft, I have to see how pliable it is. And then I called my cousin Ed Lee on the phone. I said, "Ed Lee, you're not going to believe this place. This is the fanciest place I've ever seen." He said, "Is it true what I heard? Is it true that they got bathrobes and bath towels so plush that you can hardly get your suitcase shut?" I said, "You better know it." Now, Ed Lee's been with me for a long time, my cousin Ed Lee. When I was a child, he was what was known as a wild child. At least that's what I heard my mother and my father say about cousin Ed Lee when I was a boy. I heard them say this through the heat and vents in our house. My mother said, "I don't want Sean hanging out with cousin Ed Lee because he's a wild child. He's a bad inference." Well, I didn't know what a bad inference was. But cousin Ed Lee was a few years older than me, and he knew just about everything there was to know about everything. And so I asked him, I said, "What is a bad inference?" He said, "Well, yeah, I guess I know what that is. I know what that is. Ain't you never watched football?" He said, "You know when the referee's out there on the field and he's waving his hand up and down, he says, 'Pass inference.' What your mama's trying to say is that I'm your teammate, your quarterback, follow me wherever I go." And so I did. I followed Ed Lee wherever he went. We would go walking along the side of the road, and he would look around and he would find cigarette butts that had been used up, and he'd pick them up and he'd tuck them in his pocket. And I said, "What are you doing? Those things are all smoked up." He said, "If you get just the right one, you can straighten it out, and it looks like you got about 30 seconds worth of a good, cool smoke." Cousin Ed Lee also carried a pack of cards in the back of his pocket with pictures on the backs that he'd gotten from his brother who was in the Navy. The image depictions on the backs of these cards were not exactly pictures of the apostles. They were pictures of women who were hardly wearing any clothes at all, and they had names at the bottom like Bambi and Thumper and Barbarella riding bareback through the desert, and Barbarella was always chilly. Cousin Ed Lee would sell these cards on the playground for 50 cents a pop. Now 50 times 52, I'm not that good in math. That's a lot of money. He always had money. He could do whatever he wanted because he always had the coin. In fact, he got in trouble for playing Texas Hold'em behind the choir loft, and he beat the maintenance man Gary out of $900,000. Gary still makes payments to my cousin Ed Lee to this day. Cousin Ed Lee was a wild child. There was no doubt about it. No doubt about it. He asked me one day, he said, "Do you like pound cake?" Well, I said, "Yeah, I love pound cake." Pound cake is one of the most important things in my life, as a matter of fact. The first taste of pound cake I ever had was in a Baptist fellowship hall. My mother is a Deepwater Baptist. My family is evangelical. In fact, you could probably tell when I walked across this stage, the way I walk, I look evangelical. Almost like there's a corn cob embedded in a spot in my body that just never really came out. We were the kind of people who did not believe in in things that were lascivious and lewd. We didn't believe in premarital relations before marriage because it could lead to dancing. We were something else. What we featured in my life was people who were strong and upright. And if you ever doubted how upright they were, all you had to do was look at their hair. The women had 10-foot-tall beehive hairdos. It took about a gallon of hairspray to get them that close to God. And the men, they wore their hair like every man in that generation. It was a mixture between Andy Griffith and the Great Wall of China. You could walk into a Southern Baptist fellowship hall and you could smell two things: Brill cream, pomade, and Estee Lauder's Youth Dew. The trademarked fragrance of church ladies all over the world. I can be out in public and smell Estee Lauder's Youth Dew. And what I immediately am experiencing next is the delectable flavor of fried chicken. These two are married in my mind because Southern Baptists believe in fried chicken and pound cake. In fact, one of my earliest memories is walking into a fellowship hall with my mother and my father. And like most Southern Baptist women, my mother never approached a fellowship hall without carrying a burnt offering of fried chicken beneath the holy doors. It was then laid upon the card table altar, and it was blessed by a high priest. And the man of God would give a prayer in order to speak in Southern Baptist terms. It's very easy. All you have to do is add the letters E-T-H to the ends of your words. This immediately gives you the moral high ground. The Lordeth saith unto theeth. It don't even have to make sense. The man would pray over this food, and then you would walk down this potluck line. I cannot imagine a place where I'm happier than a Southern Baptist potluck line. We only had one pound cake on that potluck line. Cousin Ed Lee told me at the Pentecostal church just down the road, they had 14 pound cakes on the Wednesday night potluck line after service every Wednesday night. Well now, being a connoisseur of such a dish, I decided that we needed to go visit this church. And so my cousin Ed Lee and I rode our bikes to this church way out in the sticks of Walton County, Florida. And we found this little building that was made of clapboards and tin roofing that was rusted on the top, and a steeple that was a little bit crooked from age, and an overgrown lawn. And there were men standing on the steps that led into this church. These were very different men than I grew up with. I grew up with very stiff men. The most animated they would get on a Sunday morning is when Brother Jimmy rolled up his sleeve when nobody was looking, and he showed me his forearm. He had a tattoo of a naked woman. And when he flexed his forearm, he could make her dance. But whenever anybody started to come out of the building, he'd roll his sleeve back down. These men were different. Pentecostal men stood on the porch of this little church, and they looked at us coming with hard eyes, tall hair, white polyester suits, white patent leather shoes, and Sansa-belt pants. These are an invention made by people who also wear Velcro shoes. They require absolutely no effort. You just flip this large flap over your belly. You've heard of them, I guess. Baptist men, a little different. You'd come walking up to a porch on a Baptist church and you'd see the ushers standing there, and when they saw you coming, they would always do the same thing. God bless you today. Here's your, God bless you. God bless you. You'd walk inside, and really what these men were doing was reconnaissance work. Because in the Southern Baptist Church, when you walk into a church like this, these men who look harmless and somewhat attractive and lovable with their fuzzy white hair and their nice blue blazer with the gold buttons, the Baptist men, they're really there to sniff your breath. and to see if you smell like last night. And if you do, they will talk into that radio they got on their sleeve. Say, we've got 2 people, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he smells like a brewery. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's sitting 3rd row. Mm-hmm. And the preacher will tailor his sermon to this man who's sitting in the 3rd row. He'll pace that stage, and when he gets a little worked up, he'll look right at that man. And if he can't get that man to move or cry, we have another weapon in our arsenal. Just as I am. The only hymn in the book that has 437 choruses. Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. We look around at the visitors, and we aim our words at them. Things get really, really tough because this song will go on and on until one hopeless sinner walks down that aisle. If we have no hopeless sinners like the man in the 3rd row who are willing to walk down the aisle, my cousin Ed Lee and I would sit in the pew and we would play paper, rock, scissors to see who would go take a bullet for Jesus. I have been saved 14 times in the Baptist church, baptized thrice. I would walk down that aisle and I would kneel and I would just make up any sin I could think of. And the preacher man, he would put his hand on my shoulder and say, thank you. Thank you. Because people have been known to starve to death in a church service like that. This Pentecostal church was nothing like what I just described. We walked into a room that had wood floors and wood ceilings and wooden pews. Every surface reflected the voice of the preacher who took the stage. The man of God, they called him. They did not call him the preacher. The man of God. Pentecostal man. And his voice was unamplified, but it reverbed across that little meeting hall like nothing you ever heard before. And he spoke in Pentecostal language. Speaking Pentecostal language, all you got to do is add the letters A-H to the ends of your words. The Lord said unto thee, hallelujah. And they sang very different songs. Very different songs. They had a full band on the stage. A full band. There were instruments that do not go together. The tuba, the accordion, the banjo, electric guitar, a drum set behind a glass case that looked like it was made for nuclear testing. There was a piano and there was an organ, and they all played together, and it sounded like they were all playing their own song. And the people stood and they sang, and the song service went on for 1 hour and 18 minutes. My cousin Ed Lee and I sat in back. Our backs were starting to hurt. My cousin Ed Lee had already gotten tired of clapping. He said, this pound cake better be worth it. The man of God started to pace the stage, and the people sat down, and there was a woman in the front row. She had this tambourine. She would shake that thing like a rattlesnake for Jesus. My cousin Ed Lee said, God, I hope they don't actually have snakes here. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I've heard that in the back they got an aquarium room. And that sometimes when there's enough visitors in church, they'll bring out the snakes. I said, there ain't no pound cake on earth that is worth that. When I was in the first grade, they sent a woman to our school from the local zoo. She brought a boa constrictor about the size of a sewage pipe. This thing was wrapped around her neck. She brought it right down to my face and let his little tongue lick my cheek. I screamed, I cried, and the next thing I knew, I was walking to the nurse's office to get a loaner pair of pants. Boy, that man of God walked the stage. He was talking to the audience, and they were talking back to him. The Lord wants you to know whatever. And he would speak right to certain people as if he knew them. And then he invited people to come down front, but not to the tune of Just As I Am. He said, the Lord had done talked to me. He said that we're going to have a healing service. Because then Lee elbowed me and said, God, I hope this is good. Sure enough, people started standing up in the back. I saw a man stand up in the back wearing a plaid shirt and a belt buckle the size of a serving platter. He had a long, skinny neck and skin that looked like he'd been left out in the weather, a little too long, lines on the corners of his eyes and big old ears. He had boots on that made loud sounds when he walked along that wood floor. And he walked toward the altar. And that man of God on the stage looked at him with sharp blue eyes and reared back his arm. And he started gathering in his arm what only can be described as Holy Spirit lightning. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger until it was the size of a beach ball that you throw around at the Auburn games. And then he flung it at the man who was standing in the aisle, and this ball of imaginary lightning flew toward the man, and it knocked him down. And we saw him fall onto the ground, and he writhed like a fish you just caught out of the Choctawhatchee Bay. And he giggled. And then the man of God walked over him, and he said, the Lord knows what you've been doing with that waitress after work. My cousin Ed Lee slapped me on the back and said, this is awesome! Sure enough, in the back, another man stood up very much like the one before. He stood up and he started walking toward the front. And he looked like every hard-working man you ever saw. And that man of God said, stop! The Lord can see into your heart. And he knows about your rotten business dealings. And then he gathered back that Holy Spirit lightning. He flung it at the man. The man fell straight backward on the floor, and he giggled like a 10-year-old schoolgirl for about 5 minutes. My cousin Ed Lee said, man, I can't wait to taste this pound cake. Because if it's anything like this theatrical production we just seen here, it's going to be something else. And then the crowd got very quiet. And the woman next to me, she said, yes, Lord. The man on the other side said, Jesus. Sounded very reptile-like. I started to feel a little weak in my bladder area. And the man of God got off the altar and he started walking down the aisle. And he came real close to where I could smell his brill cream. And he got right up next to my cousin Ed Lee. He said, the Lord wants to give you a gift. My cousin Ed Lee looked at him. He said, we're not receiving any today. He said, no, son, when the Lord speaks, you got to listen. The Lord wants to bless you. Bless you, bless you. Cousin Ed Lee said, thanks, but I'm Episcopalian. The next thing I saw were 2 ushers come down the aisle, and they were making a beeline for Cousin Ed Lee. Cousin Ed Lee immediately reached into his back pocket and gave me that deck of cards. They lifted him by his elbows and walked him to the front, and I saw his 2 little legs above the ground just a-moving. And they set him on the altar, and the man of God told the woman to play the organ, and it was a swelling chord that she played. Beautiful, beautiful sound of this gentle organ. And he said, the Lord wants to give you the gift of tongues. Do you accept? The Lord is a gentleman. He'll never push you beyond what you are able. I saw my cousin Ed Lee say, and that man told the audience to start singing, and they sang, there's room at the cross for you. And they pointed at Lee when they said you. There's room at the cross for you. Though millions have come, there's still room for one. Yes, there's room at the cross for you. And Cousin Ed Lee said, I don't want none of it. The man of God walked right up to Cousin Ed Lee, right up to him, and he placed his hand on my Cousin Ed Lee's chest. He said, the Lord is gentle and humble at heart. Take his yoke upon you and learn from him. Learn from him, for you will find rest for ye soul. Just move your mouth, son. And my Cousin Ed Lee reared his head back like nothing I have ever seen before. The child who had underneath his mattress every single Victoria's Secret catalog ever printed, every swimsuit edition of Sports Illustrated. This boy reared his head back, and he closed his eyes, and his eyelids fluttered open, and I could see the whites of his eyes just a-moving, and he reached his hands out like he was measuring a largemouth bass. And the man said, that's right, son, that's right. Move your mouth. I saw my Cousin Ed Lee open up his mouth, and he said, love, exciting and new. And I stood up and back and I said, the Love Boat. And that was the last time we ever visited a Pentecostal church. Well, I told you I was the least qualified to be here. I was invited to speak at Monroeville. Now, Monroeville being the literary capital of Alabama, it seemed like an awful grandiose thing for a guy like me. My wife and I got into our car, and we were driving, and she said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I got no earthly idea. I don't even know what I'm going to do here. I don't know why they would call me. I started writing on Facebook, and the way that started was pure accident. My wife had been feeding me fiber one week to help lower my cholesterol. She had really taken our fiber quantum into serious consideration. She had bought this special cereal called Kapow. She fed it to me a little bit with every meal. I was invited to go fishing with my cousin in Indian Pass, Florida, which is a little tiny spot just outside Apalachicola. Old world, there's not much down there but a few trailers and a few teeth. My cousin Lee and I went out there fishing, and I was just trying to impress his kids. You know, when you grow up on the Choctawhatchee Bay, you really want to look like you know what you're doing. And so I was fishing, and I was reeling and cranking, and I was pulling as hard as I could, and I felt this sensation in my belly. And well, that was a bad day. That was a real bad day. My cousin Ed Lee's boat was never the same. Well, I went home and I was totally embarrassed, and I wrote 500 words about what had happened to me. This thing did so well on Facebook that I would be in the grocery store and people knew me as the fisherman who crapped his pants. And my literary career began. Well, you see, nobody expected a whole lot out of me when I was a kid. I failed the 5th grade. I did. I failed the 5th grade. And after my father passed, when I was not even in the 7th grade, I dropped out of school altogether. I dropped out of the 7th grade, didn't go to 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th. And it wasn't much until many years later when I was an adult that I went to a community college and I enrolled, and they said, "Do you have transcripts?" I said, "No, ma'am, I didn't." You see, I grew up working construction. I worked construction job sites, laid travertine tile, hung sheetrock, did whatever needed doing, helped on a landscaping service for a long time. I was not exactly college material, but that blessed woman behind that community college desk said, "Well, we can get you in." And they did. They got me into community college. My first writing assignment was in a community college English 101 class. The teacher was named Miss Fish. Never forget her. She doubled as a librarian. She asked me to write 500 words before class because I was the first one in the class. I was so excited to be there. She said, "Well, do you know how to compose the English language?" Well, the truth was I had been reading ever since I dropped out of school. We had this little librarian in the library downtown. It was an old house. The library itself was half the size of this building. She had big frilly Southern Baptist hair. And she knew who I was, and she knew my story. And every time I walk into that library, she had a stack of books waiting for me. And so I would take 4 or 5 books home, and I would read on all sorts of subjects. And I loved to read. In fact, it was my escape. So I read, and I read, and I read. I mean, I didn't know much about coefficients, and I still don't know a whole lot about the Pythagorean theorem. But I read Papillon, and I read Hemingway, and I read Little Red Pony, and I read Mark Twain and O. Henry. And my all-time hero, before I was 14 years old, I'd read every word he ever wrote. See what I mean? Louis Grizzard. I got through college really, really fast because I was so smart. It took me 12 years. And I'm not a doctor. I did have a good time, though. I was on my way to Monroeville to speak about God knows what. I don't have the kind of experience that you need to speak on literary things. There were going to be famous people here. Mr. Don Noble on PBS wanted to have me sit on his chair and do some sort of interview. I don't know what we're going to talk about. So I was feeling very underconfident, and I asked my wife what I would do about this. She said, "I got an idea. You're going to get the female treatment today." I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "Whenever a woman is lacking on confidence, she goes and she gets her hair did." What? She said, "No, you know my friend Barbara. Whenever she breaks up with a man and she feels a little bad about herself, she goes and gets one of them god-awful hairstyles. She's changed her hair color 4 times this past month. That's what we're going to do for you." I said, "Well, I like my hair color." She said, "Well, let's just get it cut then, because it's looking a little ugly. Plus, you got some hair coming out the collar of your shirt. I mean, it's curlicued. You could braid that. You got a shillelagh coming out the side of your ear. You got hair coming out your nose. You got eyebrows that look like you could set them on fire and they'd still be there." I said, "You know, you're a very observative woman." She drove me across town to this little place called Super Cuts, and I was nervous inside. I was thinking, what in the hell am I going to speak about in Monroeville, Alabama, to a bunch of people who idolize folks like Harper Lee and Flannery O'Connor and other names I can't pronounce? I walked in, and I saw this place was completely busy. It was busy with white-haired people because I live in Northwest Florida. In Northwest Florida, we have snowbirds. None of these people are from Florida. If they are, they're from Yankee, Florida down here. Or they're from Canada. Like my father used to say, the only difference between a Canadian and a canoe is a canoe actually tips. He was an interesting man, my father. I'll never forget walking with him through Spring Hill, Tennessee. We lived there for a short while. He was a steel worker while he was building the GM plant. And we're walking down the main road there, and there's a two-story building, and up on the two-story building was this man who was standing against the brick wall with his hands like this. And my father said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And the man said, "Move out the way, move out the way." My father said, "Don't do it. You got so much to live for. Don't do it for your mother." He said, "I ain't got no mother. She left when I was 2. He said, "Well, don't do it for your father." He said, "My father left when I was 3. He said, "Well, don't do it because of Dale Earnhardt." The man said, "Who's Dale Earnhardt?" He said, "Go ahead and jump, you damn Yankee." They let me into this little chair. I sat down in it. This woman, she was from Louisiana, and she sounded like it. I love the Cajun accent. It sits well in my ears. And she spoke. She said things in French. Parlez-le plus lentement, s'il vous plaît. And I tried to ask her how to say that, and it sounded just like it did right there. And she'd laugh at me, and she'd say, "All right, what kind of haircut you thinking today?" I said, "I'm thinking something sassy that can give me a little bit of confidence." She lifted up a strand of my hair. She said, "Okay, I got it. And she spun me around. She started clipping on my hair. And then when she was done, she spun me back around, looked in the mirror. And I want to tell you, it was the most beautiful haircut I have ever had in my life. My confidence level went through the roof immediately. This must be what authors do all the time. And then she said, "Would you like to have me cut the hair coming out your ears?" I got some of it here today. I saved it for you. I said, "Sure, why not?" She said, "How about the hair coming out your collar?" I said, "Yeah, I ain't got nothing against that." She said, "How about the hair coming out the back of your collar? How about your neckline? How about your eyebrows? My God, look at them eyebrows." I said, "You have a friend out in the car who you'd get along with." And so she spun me around, and she started clipping all along my head like Floyd the barber, and she got me back at the mirror. She said, "All right, let's get them eyebrows." She reached into her pocket. Now, people have been cutting eyebrows the same way since the beginning of time. They get this little black Boy Scout comb that they hand the scouts when they're trying to prevent lice. They press it up against your eyebrow, and they flick on these clippers, and they zzz, zzz. That's it. Very easy. There's not much to it. She pressed this comb against my right eyebrow, and she zipped. She pressed it against my left eyebrow. And I had been suppressing a cough for about 45 minutes. And when you suppress something, it makes you want to do something. Even if you don't have to do that thing, thinking about not doing the thing makes the thing impossible not to do. And I let her rip. I coughed up a lung. There was bronchial matter all over my lap. And I heard that woman gasp, and she said a very ugly word beginning with the 19th letter of the alphabet. For those Pentecostals among you, go ahead and count. And I looked in my lap, and I saw a comb, and I saw a little pile of amber-colored hair. And she said, "Oh my God, oh my God, you've got to trust me. Don't freak out, don't freak out. We can work with this, please." I said, "What is it? What is it? What happened?" She said, "This has never happened to me before." She spun me around. I looked at myself in the mirror. I went like this. I looked perpetually surprised. She said, "I know this is quite unprofessional of me. Please don't hold it against me. But I need a cigarette." That woman walked outside, and 4 or 5 of her hairstyling friends came out with her, and they patted her shoulder. I could see her crying. They whipped out 10-inch long menthol Misty Slims, and they held these things inside of 2 puffs. And I looked at myself in this mirror. I was wearing a pink cape around my chest, and I just kept going like this. They came in and they said, we've been talking about it, we've figured it out. We know what we're going to do. I said, okay. Lay it on me. She said, we're just going to take the other one off. I said, do you need to go have another cigarette? This is all I got left. She said, it's okay. She said, you're going to be completely naked when we do that. I said, completely naked on the top. I said, is that like being naked? She said, no, you can wear your socks and be naked. She fired up them clippers. She looked at me in the mirror. She said, all right, just hold still. And she took it off. I could feel that pinch on my eyebrow. And then when she was finished, she got right down in front of me, got nose to nose with me. She was checking for symmetry. Nope, that didn't do it. And so she went back outside to go smoke a few more cigarettes. And I stood up with this pink cape still attached to my chest, and I walked to the waiting room to wait for them to finish. I sat down, and beside me was this little stand full of magazines. On these magazines, like People and Rolling Stone, they had movie stars of all kinds. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but people like Billy Bob Thornton, they got beautiful eyebrows. People like Mick Jagger, who are not gifted with good looks necessarily, they got luscious sets of eyebrows. And I saw this van come rolling into the parking lot. It said Black Creek Baptist Church. It's the church my mother goes to. These old men stepped out, and they were walking toward the door. I knew these men, and they opened the door, and a little bell dinged on the thing, and they looked at me, and I looked at them, and they turned right back around, and they left. The woman came back in from smoking their cigarettes, and she said, we've got a better idea. We're just going to draw them on. I said, with what? She said, well, we got eyeliner pencils. And so they sat me down, and they got these brown, chocolate brown eyeliner pencils, and they drew the McDonald's arch right on my forehead. She looked at me and she said, well, I think we're finished here. This one's on the house. I walked out that place, and I got into my truck, and my wife said, oh my God. She said, well, do you feel better about yourself now? I said, just drive. We drove to Monroeville, Alabama, and in the parking lot, I saw people who are household names. These are writers who have gone through all the right places and all the right hoops they've jumped through. They have all the right awards, and they have done all the right things that you need to do to be a writer. And they write with such beauty, it ought to be qualified as a misdemeanor. I read some of the work that was on the tables, keeping my hand over my eyebrows. It was the most beautiful literature I've ever read in my life. And I knew I had to get up and give a talk to these people. My God, it couldn't get any worse. I didn't really know what I was doing, rubbing my head like this. Sure enough, Mr. Don Noble came up to me. He said, Are you Sean Dietrich? Or is he waiting in the wings? I said, no, that's me. He said, okay, well, here's your microphone. May God have mercy on your soul. And I'm telling you, I got up and I delivered a story. It was really one of the first times that I have really delivered a story in public. I did not ever see myself doing this, what I'm doing here. I never thought that I would be writing 500 words a day, which I have done for the past 6 years without skipping a single day. I have 14 books. They're not good books, but they're books. 2 novels and a novel coming out in July and another novel coming out the next year. I can hardly stand it. I've had more fun than I've ever had in my life in these past years. And it all started by pooping my pants. Hey, thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. And now they inform me it's time for you to really shoot me hard with your 22s and Winchesters and ask me any questions you want to ask, but just know right up front that I'm probably not going to be very good at this. So, questions? Yes, ma'am. About my dog. Which one? All right. About my dog. My dog became kind of a social media sensation. She's a lot more popular than I am. She's a black and tan coonhound. Her name is Thelma Lou. I named her after my favorite television show, The Andy Griffith Show. I got her, we were in, I was in Birmingham actually. I was doing a show, and I got a phone call from my wife. She was coming to meet me, and she said, well, I've got some very bad news. I had this dog. She was 13 years old. She did everything with me. She helped me discover myself. She helped me find myself, this dog. And her name was Ellie Mae. Black and tan coonhound with long ears that hung down to her chest, tan eyebrows that showed her expressions whenever she looked at you, and she had a tongue that could lap up the River Jordan. She rode him shotgun in my seat wherever I went. Good old girl. My wife called. She said, I don't know how to tell you this, but she's not going to make it. I said, well, what is it? She said, it's pancreatitis. My wife turned on FaceTime on my cell phone, and there I was in our room in Birmingham, and I looked at my dog, and I spoke to her. And I want to tell you, I've never seen a more brave creature, not in all my life. She was at the vet. She knew what was fixing to happen to her, and I saw that dog march bravely toward that vet who held the vial of blue solution that she was going to inject in her veins. She passed. I cried so hard, I cried on the floor of that room. My wife left very, very quickly. She got up here, and then I had to go do this stinking show and make people somewhat happy, I guess. And I looked while I was speaking, and they had this huge screen behind me and this projector back here. And there was a picture that a photographer had taken of me for some promo stuff of me on my 14-foot boat, the SS Squirrel. And on the front was my coonhound, Ellie Mae. She was looking outward at the world like she always did. She rode on my bow. She always rode on the bow. She would never ride in the back with me. She always had to know where we were going. And I turned and looked at that picture while I was telling a story about Ed Lee, of all things. And I lost it. I lost it right in front of all sorts of people. A few days later, we were on our way home from Birmingham, and I was looking on Craigslist for a new dog, because an old man wrote me once I wrote about my dog dying in that Birmingham room. He said, the best advice I can give you is get another dog as fast as you can, because nothing will ever take that sting away, but, you know, it'll make your life a lot better. I'm glad I followed his advice. On the way home, we stopped at a little place called Molino, Florida, not far from Pensacola, and I saw this little black and tan thing jumping across a golden field toward me. She singled me out. Her parents, her brothers, and her sisters, they were all back there, and she bounded toward me. She got into my arms. She about broke my back, ruptured L4 and L5. She licked my face, and I could tell she'd been eating cat poop. She bit my ear so hard there was blood running down the side of my cheek, and I said, I got to have her. That's my dog. Yes, ma'am.
I've been enjoying your stories for quite a while now, and you wrote
I appreciate that very, very much.
One more quick question.
Yeah, go ahead. Who? Anybody?
How do we find you on Facebook? Sean of the South?
Yeah, the name came from a friend of mine. I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I was driving along the 331 bridge after meeting my mother, and I had an empty cooler full of beer in the back. But it was only because other people were drinking it. And I saw blue lights behind me. It was just a party at my mother's house. I truly had not been drinking. So I got pulled over, and the cop came around to me, and she shined her light in my face. She was about 5'1", stick of dynamite, this woman. And she saw that cooler, and she was very, very skeptical, so she had me step out of my car. She sniffed my breath. She did all that. She could determine that I had not been drinking. And she kind of pushed me onto my tailgate, and people came because they had this journeyman day. These little ride-alongs in the sheriff's vehicle were with her, and she wanted to show them what a strip search looked like. This is a true story, and God strike me dead in this spot if I'm lying to you. But she did a strip search. She stripped my car down. My toolbox contents were right all over the ground. The next day, I was so traumatized, I went to breakfast with a friend of mine, and my friend laughed so hard that it's a woman. She's in marketing. She laughed so hard she almost wet herself. She said, "You know what you ought to do? You ought to write about this in your blog. And I've been meaning to tell you something else. When you put this blog out, you know what I think you should name it?" I said, "What?" She said, "Well, 2 names. Sean with the Wind." Or like the famous Alabama song, "Song of the South, sweet potato pie and shut my mouth." So we went with Sean of the South. Thanks for having me here today. It's been a wonderful pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.